teaching at the University of Nairobi since 1992. Before that at Kenyatta University. And I love to teach philosophy. And I consider it a great privilege to be able to share some of my thoughts with you. I'm very grateful to Professor Corey, who asked me to come over and who facilitated my coming over. And her great hospitality with her husband. I am enjoying it thoroughly in their home with their two lovely children, the ones who are still at home, and their little nice dog. Children.
But if you're interested in, I could provide the dog to you.
Yes. There'll be quarantine troubles. So I want to talk today about African philosophy. And we're talking about African philosophy, thought, and practice. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, good, because I can't. I lost my sight at the age of 1, and it was very little sight, so it wasn't a big loss. That's another long story. Now, if for any reason the PowerPoint disappear, please holler, as you say around here. This is what I hope to cover today. First, something to do with definitions, and then the historical background, and then I'll share with you some of the seminal texts in African philosophy. Then I'll talk about trends in contemporary philosophy, contemporary African philosophy. And then the debate about particularism and universalism. And then I'll be coming towards the end of my talk, and I'd like to do a quick job so that we have more discussion than talk. So I hope I succeed. I don't have my Braille notes, but I learned yesterday from Professor Corey that that's an advantage to you. I have to do a bit of listening before I talk. That's interesting. The historical background to African philosophy is that African philosophy comes from the position of oppression. For about 5 centuries, Western Europe was confident that there is no philosophy in Africa. So much that the term African philosophy would have been considered to be a contradiction. For it was assumed that where there was philosophy, there was no Africa, and where there was Africa, there was no philosophy. And Hegel was very influential among other people in encouraging this view that there is no philosophy in Africa. And he stated some things that were very influential. This is one of them. Africa is no historical part of the world. You can see that. I don't know whether we were supposed to have been in another planet. It has no movement or development to exhibit. And the historical movements in the north, you have the Asiatic, and you have what he also calls European Africa. And he goes on, you'll have to really enjoy the PowerPoints because I'm not reading them word for word. He makes a very shocking statement. He's talking about Africa being divided into 3. There is Africa south of the Sahara. He doesn't say Sahara, he says the desert. And he calls that Africa proper. And that is the Africa that has no history, no movement, no development, innocent forever. And then you have European Africa, North Africa because it's close to Europe. It has some semblance of civilization, and it has Europe to thank for it. And then you have Egypt, it has some civilization, and it has Asia to thank for it. And those of us from south of the desert are doomed forever to live in innocence, and at this point innocence is a derogatory word. To live in a situation with no reasoning, no development, no philosophy. And what distinguishes Africa proper from European Africa, and from Asiatic Africa, and from the rest of the world is that there is no reasoning in Africa proper. It lacks history, development, culture, and so there is no philosophy in Africa. That was Hegel, the great philosopher, the system builder, now speaking about Africa. But it turns out that these things, he was getting a lot of them from some explorers and others from almost fiction. A very unphilosophical method of gathering information. Excuse me. Okay, I just wanted to be sure I hadn't jumped a slide. Now, many other Western scholars had the same belief. And here I am giving only two examples. The Primitive Mentality by Lucien Levy-Bruhl, who says that concept formation in Africa is an emotional process. There are rituals, rites of passage, a lot of emotion, and so African concepts are mystical. But how do the Europeans form their concepts? Through dialogue, discussion, reflection, and so their concepts are intellectual.
Can I stop you for just a second?
Yes.
When would the primitive mentality, when would that have been written?
The primitive mentality was written in the 19th century.
Okay.
And I'm amazed that I didn't put the year here. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay.
And all of you follow Jean's example. Just, intervene and make sure you are not left behind. That's very good. Now, so that is Levy-Bruhl. Then you also have The African Today by Dietrich Westermann. Written around a similar time, I don't remember clearly, or early 20th century, but I think it was more of 19th. And basically he says Africans cannot concentrate too long on intellectual issues. They get tired, they get bored, they can't handle it. And some of you who are into education, that a similar way of thinking really influenced the kind of education that African Americans were given. It was believed that the intellect of the African is much lower than the intellect of the European. And obviously, if the intellect is lower, philosophy would not be one of the things you want to tax such a low intellect with. You want to be kind and keep. If you know that you have a car that can't carry 20 tons, you don't have any business putting 20 tons on it. You would be overloading it. So it would have been thought to teach philosophy to Africans. It would have been to overload them. So that was the approach. And this view that I've been expounding is what one of our scholars has called the conventional Western conception of the African mentality. It influenced education, it influenced education widely speaking, broadly speaking, and obviously it caused a lot of Europeans to rule out philosophy in Africa. Now, but this whole approach was challenged during the decolonization period. You see, the struggle against colonialism was not just political. It was also religious, it was economic, it was social, but the loudest that is known is the political aspect. And because of that struggle, people started to say, well, okay, let us talk about philosophy in Africa. So that today is not, the issue is not whether or not there is African philosophy, but what is it? How does it look like? And the next thing I want to do is give you an overview of some of the main texts that you would need to look at if you wanted to study African philosophy. The first one here is by Placide Tempel's African Bantu Philosophy. This was written by a Belgian Catholic missionary working in the Congo. And the main reason why he wrote it is that he observed that Africans would convert to Catholicism. But whenever they had a serious crisis, they would go back to the medicine man. They would go back to divination. And he asked, why so? And his answer was, these people have a philosophy passed down to them by their ancestors, which answers the fundamental questions of life. So that philosophy is more deeply entrenched than the Roman Catholicism that we are bringing to them. So that the Roman Catholicism they are having is a veneer, but deep down they have a worldview. And when it really matters, they will refer back to it. That was his view. And so he presented the worldview of the Luba people of the Congo as Bantu philosophy. And his argument was, what you find among the Luba, you are likely to find among all other Bantus, and he thought by implication, all other Africans. So that book, now we don't like it a lot because we say it was not written for us. It was a European speaking to other Europeans about us. I find that I have to experience that a lot. I go to the post office with my guide, and the person at the counter, instead of talking to me and asking me what I want, he asks my guide, what does he want? And you know you are a topic, but you know you are not a participant in the conversation. You are only the subject of the conversation, but you are not a partaker of it. So it's very real to me. And he was writing to try and help his fellow Belgian priests and so on to know how better to convert the Africans. And it wasn't written for the whole world, it was written for Europeans. Now, PowerPoint here is doing something I didn't expect. But I have seen what is happening. The second one is by a person called Marcel Griol. I will remove this. I think I'll be a happier man. Because as you talk, you generate heat. And then you start to find it hard to cope. Now, Marcel Griol went and interviewed a Dogon elder in West Africa. And the Dogon elder was very articulate in explaining his culture. Placide Tempels had said that the Africans cannot articulate their own philosophy. They only leave it out. And he actually dared to say, it is we, the Europeans, who can articulate it for them. And then they will recognize it in our words. But Marcel Griol goes and interviews a Dogon elder, a blind one actually, and the man is so articulate about the worldview of his people, and so he disabuses Temple's view that the African cannot articulate his own philosophy. That book is very important, originally written in French. Even Bantu philosophy was originally written in French. Then we have Abraham's book. W.E. Abrahams from Ghana, where one of your colleagues comes from here. And he wrote The Mind of Man, The Mind of Africa. And he was a person trained in Western philosophy. And he actually handled African philosophy using the conceptual tools of Western philosophy. And that book is very important. What other book is important? John Beattie, African Religions, Plural, and Philosophy, Singular. The man was a theologian, not a philosopher. And that book has so many chapters on theological issues and one miserable chapter on philosophy, handled very badly too. But because he wrote at a time when there was almost no publication on this area of knowledge, he became a star. And that book was read a lot by people in these parts where you live. And whenever somebody read that book, they felt extremely educated. We have a rather low opinion of the book from a philosophical point of view, but we think it's a great book from a religious studies point of view. But it is influential. I only met the old man this year. He's now pretty advanced in age, and it was a joy to meet him, but I don't like his book as a piece of philosophy. Now, Pauline J. Huntonji from Benin wrote an amazing book called African Philosophy, Myth and Reality. The main thing he did not like is the work of Temples and Mbiti. Because Mbiti was handling African philosophy just like Temples, from an anthropological kind of approach, an ethnological kind of approach, where you interview the people, they tell you we believe this and this about the universe, and you say, that is their philosophy. And Huntonji comes along and says, that is not philosophy. That is anthropological material clothed in philosophical language and pretending to be philosophy. And he is one of these fellows who talk so forthrightly. And he used a term for what Temples and Mbiti had done. He called it ethnophilosophy. And he says it is some weird hybrid between ethnology and philosophy. And it is neither good ethnology nor good philosophy. But it is simply ethnological material which is being presented by an author, and he claims it is a philosophy of that people, but it is his own philosophical thoughts. And so his book was very, very important. And he says African philosophy is the same as philosophy anywhere else. It must be critical. It must be reflective. It must be written down. The only thing that is slightly different about it is that it has an African cultural context. Then we have Kwasi Wiredu from Ghana again. Philosophy and an African culture. And he takes the same approach as Huntonji quite a bit, but he's a little more sympathetic to the philosophical thoughts of the African people in the villages. He treats it with more sympathy than Huntonji. And we read he's a very good writer. There is an essay of his that you can easily Google and find called Decolonizing African Philosophy and Religion. Decolonizing African Philosophy and Religion. And it's one of the greatest African philosophers we have works here in the US. He's called D.A. Masolo. He's a Luo like me. And he says there are only two people whom he knows. When they send you a journal article, you will not need to edit it. One is Bertrand Russell, and the other is Kwasi Wiredu. So, then comes my compatriot, H. Odera Oruka, Practical Philosophy in Search of an Ethical Minimum. This book was actually published posthumously, but he put together his main thoughts, and we will be coming back to Oruka in a short while.